Here in Atlanta, I don't know if you've noticed, the azaleas are fading. The roses and irises are starting to bloom. The dogwood trees are green now with just little white flecks of flower petals scattered in their branches. And this week I've been surveying my potted plants for any sign of life. I know an experienced gardener would know what to expect, like which plants were killed off by the cold and which ones are actually perennials and they're going to pop right back up as if winter had never happened. I'm still guessing. I don't know my plants. And here in church, we are also in this season of things growing, of things coming back, and of looking where we see new life coming from what has died. And we're watching nature and how it changes and adapts to a changing environment. And we can see that what is true in nature is also true for us, both physically and spiritually. God invites individuals and churches to change and to grow, converting our lives not just one time, but many times if we're willing. And just as the world we live in is evolving, so too our spiritual lives. They evolve and expand. And just when we think we have it all figured out, God steps in and shakes things up. I don't know if you've ever had a point in your spiritual life where God seemed to be telling you to do something you sure was wrong, or at least you had been taught that was wrong. As we're stepping into our scriptures today, we're back with Peter in another transformative moment in his spiritual journey. And I really think his story may be one of the best examples of a transforming and evolving faith. As Peter grew up in a typical Hebrew family of his time, listening to scriptures read, observing the Sabbath, eating appropriate foods, spending time with friends who did the same. He ended up joining the family business. As we've been following his story through this season, we observed his life begin to change on that day when he meets this traveling teacher and feels God urging him to follow. And over the next few years following Jesus, he learns what the life of a rabbi is like. And he comes to believe that this one is the Messiah that Israel's been waiting for. He anticipates being a part of the next revolution that's going to free his people from oppression. And his world is transformed again by tragedy when his teacher and his friend and mentor is killed. He's executed as a criminal. Peter goes into hiding and grief and probably depression. And he does discover in this time in his life the truth that God is there with us in our darkest times and places. Just when he's at his lowest, sure that all hope is lost, he sees the risen Christ. He's called back into service. And on the day of Pentecost, he's filled with the Spirit of God. He's strengthened and begins again. Now, Peter and his friends go on to get arrested and jailed for their subverting the religious systems that exist. The religious and the political powers are threatening them, and he has to deal with the arguments from those who believe they're trying to trust God in Christ, but at this point, the church and the Christians in Jerusalem, they still see themselves as a branch of Judaism. They're following the laws of the Torah. They're just worshiping Jesus as the Messiah. And Peter's kind of been on the fence about who is in and who is out and how is this going to work, until he has another transformational moment, one that allows him to say the words that we read today. I truly understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who reveres God and does what is right is acceptable. Now, on this particular day, he's been out teaching and doing things, and he feels the Spirit guiding him to accept an invitation to be a guest at the home of Simon the tanner. Simon was Jewish, but he was a tanner, and he was an outcast. He would have been considered unclean in multiple senses. The tanners worked with dead animals, which would make him ritually unclean, and making leather really stinks, smells bad. A lot of things that would make him far away from others. People felt superior to him. But Simon the tanner had joined the Jesus movement. He had found acceptance there where the rest of society had shunned him. So Simon the tanner is hosting Simon Peter the apostle in his home. And here, we see Peter's faith already opened up a bit, sharing hospitality with someone within his faith, no matter what their status. But on this day, God is pushing him a little bit farther. The purity laws that he had followed all of his life forbid him to associate and eat with Gentiles. But then he has this dream that won't let him go on the same. He describes it as a dream or a vision, a trance. He sees something like 4 sheets coming down from heaven, lowered by the corners. He describes it to his friends who are questioning his choices. I looked closely at it. I saw 4-footed animals and beasts of prey and reptiles and birds of the air. And I heard the voice of God saying to me, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." And I replied, "No, Lord, nothing profane has ever covered my lips." According to the Jewish dietary laws of the time, these animals were unclean. They should not be eaten if one was going to maintain holiness. Peter's no was a response of repulsion. It was deeply ingrained into his life, into his mind. But the voice answered from heaven, "What God has made clean, you must not call profane." This vision of inclusion is immediately tested as a Roman centurion named Cornelius was directed by an angel and told to come visit Peter and bring Peter to his home. And this invitation for Peter to partake of these animals in this vision is actually an invitation for Peter to go with Cornelius to eat in the home of a Gentile. In accepting this invitation of an Italian, Roman, Gentile enemy as part of the Christian way, this evolving faith is acknowledging the diversity that is a gift of God. Peter begins to realize that God will be revealed in a variety of ways. The Spirit of God is alive and moving within any culture, any ethnicity, any age, gender. This experience leads him to say, if God gave the Gentiles the same Spirit that he gave us as we believed in the Lord Jesus Christ, who was I to hinder God? God has shown me that we should not call anyone impure or unclean. And I realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism. A verse that we probably need to hear more often in our culture. This kind of change wasn't easy then, and it's not easy now. It takes a long time and a lot of training to teach a person to fear a particular group of people and be repulsed by that kind of person. It takes the people that we trust, that we need in our lives, the people that we love, to speak about those other people as dirty, as barbarians, as pagans, or lazy, or mooches, or criminals, calling people evil, terrorist, animals. If you hear that enough times by those you trust, you can't help but believe it. And you can't afford to question what you're taught. There might be consequences. You might lose the relationships you need. This is good old-fashioned conditioning. And I know most of us like to think that we are a lot more rational than our pets, but sometimes we're not. Much like training a dog. You may not want to use an invisible fence to train your dog, but it works because of conditioning. The fence has a wire buried along the edges, the boundaries of the yard, and the dog has a collar that buzzes if they cross it. So first they have a visual cue at the edge of the yard. Second, they have an audible cue from the collar when they approach that wire. And then they can count on an unpleasant tingling sensation from the collar when they cross it. And with a little practice and conditioning, the dog learns to stay in the yard. And crossing the invisible fence becomes repulsive to the animal. It would be nice if we were not also much like our pets. You might have been taught that successful people don't live out of their cars. You might have been taught that socialists are evil. You might have been taught that transgendered people are perverted and women really need to stay in their place and let the men lead. You might have been taught that Muslims just are terrorists. And these lessons are not easily unlearned, but they can be. It is the result of true divine encounter that we have this kind of transformation, deep change that moves us to think differently and begin to live differently. Now, I think most of us in this congregation here and those involved watching, well, we have started this transformation. Many have come from churches or families that have insisted that there are people that God cannot accept and you should not associate with. Maybe they didn't state it that clearly, but you noticed, that some kind of people never seem to enter the building. Maybe the message was covertly communicated that God will only love some people if they change who they are, if they get all their lives together and they fix all their flaws first. But we are here because we believe that our Creator's love is unconditional and no one should be left out. And at the same time, we recognize that's a difficult belief to live out every day. Conversion is a process. Transformation begins with that aha moment, but it requires continuing attention to what fears and judgments still need to be unlearned. So maybe even we need to keep asking ourselves, who is it hard to imagine sitting down to eat with? Who do we not want to share a difficult conversation with? I think one of the reasons that we don't want the Spirit of God to take us into this kind of transformation is because it's hard and it can be exhausting. If I'm going to sit down and have a real conversation with someone I completely disagree with, someone I'm sure could not possibly know the love of God that I know, someone who is ignorant and obnoxious, I mentioned this is hard work. The hard work of love that Jesus did every day when he put up with his slow-to-change disciples and his relatives and those colleagues. To accept the people that society or our in-group tells us are unacceptable requires that we try to understand who has taught them to see the world this way. How did they come to understand the world in the way that they do, to find it so hard for us to be on the same page? Sometimes that name-calling is what we do when we don't want to do the slow, hard work of participating in God's movement to keep transforming the world, one annoying stranger or relative at a time. But we can say with Peter, God has shown me I should not call anyone impure, unclean. I realize how true it is. God does not show favoritism. The God that we worship loves people, all of creation, and we are invited each and every day to expand our faith, expanding it through our encounters with others, learning to understand and embrace their otherness. We are again and again invited to open up to the varieties of divine revelation, religious experience, greeting difference with hospitality rather than fear. This is what we believe true worship looks like. And together we will seek to support one another in this worship of loving God by loving all God's people and God's creation. And now together, let's sing of this unconditional love of God.